now I have to remember that you can all hear me. Fantastic. Boom, 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 boom. For the microphones, you do have to turn them on. They just flick up. It shouldn't be too tricky at all.
Hello.
Oh.
Hello.
Excellent. Yours are a little loud, whereas mine seems to have hit the perfect volume. So you can definitely be heard, but you might have to be just a little bit further. We'll play with it. We'll figure it out. All good. And we're live, streaming to 3 people, no doubt, but we're streaming nonetheless. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Republic's final event of the year, where we're looking towards a Republican future. My name is John Hall. I'm the Vice Chair of our Republic. And today we want to put down standard, normal, everyday politics, the back and forward, the arguing over every issue, and instead have a slightly more ephemeral discussion about what a republic could look like in Scotland in the future. We're not going to talk about whether or not people are going to vote for it. We're not going to talk about any of the settlement issues or the complexities of it. Instead, we're going to get into grand vision. We're going to talk a little bit about what our options are, what we could do, which is something that we don't often get a chance to do when campaigning on an issue. We don't get to sit back and talk about the big vision of where we're going. And so we thought it would be a fun thing to do. And we've assembled a lovely panel who are hopefully going to give us some real insights into this. And we're going to start, just ask each of you to give us a short introduction and tell us a little bit about yourselves. Fatima, would you be kind enough to start?
Thank you very much. And it's great to be here. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. My name is Fatima Joli, and I am an Aberdeenshire councillor. I represent a very beautiful, my home ward of Westland District. I was elected in May 2022, just last year, so I'm coming on 2 years in elected office soon. And yeah, I usually get involved in so many polarised debates, probably this one is included. So I look forward to chatting to everyone today about this particular topic. Thank you.
Working? Yep, there we go. Hi, I'm Emma Roddick. I'm an SNP MSP for the Highlands and Islands, which the Royals call their play park. I'm also in the Scottish Government, but definitely not here today as a government minister, so please, if you tweet about anything I've said, do not make it sound like it's come from the Scottish Government, because it has not. But definitely have a lot of opinions around the royal family and democracy and how we should be moving forward as a country. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today.
Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Chapman and I am the Scottish Greens MSP for the North East of Scotland region, and it's nice to be on a panel with other North Easters and folk not from the Central Belt. So yeah, it's great that we've managed that. Well done to our Republic. I have been an MSP since 2021, since the elections in May, but have been a troublemaker for a long time before then. On a whole variety of issues, Fatima and Emma have both talked about, the nature of our political debates, and I'm proud to be a stirrer and a troublemaker in that. As a South African citizen and not a British subject, I maybe have a slightly different take on some of the conversations we'll have today, but I'm looking forward to the conversations that we have, and hopefully to get some space for that big picture and vision thinking, because our politics doesn't allow for that much of that. So looking forward to this afternoon. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Suzanne McLaughlin. I'm Suzanne McLaughlin. I'm not a politician, which will be blatantly obvious if any of you ever look at my social media, because I've signed no code of conducts. So I'm a sort of professional troublemaker, as it were. I couldn't be more delighted to be on this panel with some of my most favourite shouty women in Scotland. I'm on the board of Women for Independence, have been since we first became an official committee way back in 2015. I'm also a trustee for Engender, and we do a lot of work advising some governments, councils, policies and organisations on feminist governance. Again, much like Emma said, I'm although I do that, that's one of my hats. I'm absolutely not here on behalf of Engender, although the shouty feminism bit is. Again, strong opinions, but I'm not as learned as my friends here, so it's a lot more opinion-based. But I'm sure it's going to be a great afternoon, and looking forward to take your questions and chat through how we can make this country of ours better.
We'll figure it out.
All right, testing. So I'm Joe. I've been a member of about 23 different activist organisations in a fairly sustained capacity. Currently, I'm involved in the Edinburgh Coalition Against Poverty, the Industrial Workers of the World, Living Rent Edinburgh, Food Not Bombs, and Resisting Transphobia in Edinburgh, which is quite a lot. So I'm like the you know, if we're doing troublemaker things, I'm like the hard walking kind of nuisance. So yeah, yeah, I think that just to summarise it, they, them pronouns, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. Nice to have so many troublemakers in one room. So we're going to just kickstart straight away with the vision stuff. You hopefully all got the questions in advance. You're aware I'm going to ask you this. Could you give me and the group an example of what a Scottish Republic could look like? Do you want to go first? Sorry, that's me.
Super, thanks very much. I think for me, a Republican Scotland is focused and has as its foundation 3 key principles. The first is one of democracy and ensuring that all of our leaders, whether they are in our national governments or in our local community organisations, are democratically elected and have very, very clear lines of accountability and transparency in how they function. So it's about democracy having, in that very structured sense, but democracy runs much, much deeper than that. It's about people, all of us, having opportunities to have a say over the things that affect our everyday lives, whether that's, you know, as basic as, you know, the bins on our streets, to the big things about how we organise transport as a nation. So democracy and that sort of participatory and deliberative democracy runs through my vision of a Republican Scotland very, very clearly. The second point is a Republican Scotland that's based on equality. And in many ways, I think that's in stark contrast to what we have at the moment with an unelected head of state that is born into privilege and power and influence. And it's not, you may think, well, that's just about democracy, isn't it? And it's something much more fundamental than that. I think having a structure where you inherit wealth, where you inherit privilege and you inherit power, that sets up a culture of entitlement, a culture of prestige, and a culture that some people are worth more than others. And I think that is at the very heart of what the British state is. It's at the very heart of the monarchy, and I think we need to be as far away from that as absolutely possible. And the third element, which is tied directly to the dysfunction that is the monarchy at the moment, is I think I want our Republican Scotland to be based on the principle of the common good, sharing the commons, of allowing our resources, whether those are human in nature or whether they are our natural resources, to be there for the benefit of everybody and not to be there to be channeled through that cultural hierarchy of power and prestige. And there's one specific element of that, I think, that we can maybe all see quite tangibly, the Crown estate. The Crown owns the seabed. And we know that at the moment, whether it's to do with our fishing, whether it's to do with our renewables, we are hampered at doing what we might want to do because we don't have collective commons of those kinds of resources. So I would say those are my 3 sort of grounding principles for a Republican Scotland. There are many more besides, but I think focusing particularly on not having a monarchy, for me it's democracy, equality and commons.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think the fundamental point is that a Scottish Republic would look like whatever people vote for it to look like. So to me, yes, having that democracy, accountability, clear lines of who is responsible to whom, and should it be the people who then get to decide when you've kind of served your time? I think it should. But it's also about, for me, the royal family being a symptom of a much bigger problem. People not having enough food, people not having a place to live, people not having an equal share of the resources of this country, but others just through who they happen to be born to and when, having ridiculous, unimaginable amounts of wealth and assets that they have absolutely no right to. And to me, it's that, and the fact that we have put up with that as the UK for so long, which shows just how kind of frozen in indecision we are. And it's not just the royal family, it's certainly other baked-in institutional issues. I mean, you just have to glance at Westminster and see the hooks that MPs have to hang their swords on, and the fact that they can still get snuff on expenses, to see that we just have this big problem with not being able to leave old things in the past and move on and do better. So for me, it would just be an opportunity to create a better country. It wouldn't ensure one on its own, because you would still need to convince people that equality, fairness, sharing of resources are good things that we should be doing, but it would ultimately be up to people to decide that that's for them, and that's where I think we should be in a healthy country. Am I passing? Yep.
Hi, excuse the pun here, but I think where you're going to find most of us singing from the same choir here, you're not going to get a great deal of disagreement. And what I put in my notes when we were talking about the big idea here was, before I took into what I think, it's why is it wrong? Like, we can think of a million reasons, but I wrote the big bad, and the inherent wrong in thinking that a bloodline is better than somebody else. See, when you really think what that really says, somebody's blood's more important than somebody else, that is a dark, dark, dark path. So right away, I don't think we need another reason to get rid of the monarchy other than that one, quite frankly. So that's the big bad, and I think that would be my first ever answer to anyone saying, why should we get rid of the monarchy? That's a dark place. As a philosopher, albeit a kind of baby philosopher, for me, I agree with Emma and Maggie that it's got to be about democracy, but democracies can still be 7 sheep in a wolf voting for what to have for lunch. So there's got to be people overseeing the democracy, and there's got to be clear mechanisms of removal. And I think as we've seen that it isn't always as easy as I think we would like that to be. So I think I sort of have a bit of a dream of a bit of a nod back to ancient Athens and the bull and the 500 people who essentially it's jury duty, really, our parliaments and our second chambers, if you like. So talk about that a wee bit more often, but I think that we should have elected members, absolutely, and we should also have people who are just chosen, and we could look at that as one of the sort of big ideas of people who just come and serve their time, and they'll be recompensed properly by the state, and they would be overshadowing a sort of second chamber, if you like, so that even our elected members have somebody looking over their shoulders, and our ordinary people who are pulled in have someone looking over their shoulders. So it comes right down, essentially it comes down to the same thing, absolute democracy, but built at a community, civil, individual level, where we've all got an equal stake and an equal say, and move away from this completely unequal society where somebody's cutting about with a hat that, if so, could feed every single hungry man in the country. So, thank you.
Thank you. I think they've covered literally everything, and like Suzanne said, we're probably going to sing from the same hymn sheet, but I think what's really important to me that we need to recognise first is that the royal family is both unelected and not accountable. And I think I can go strong on that line about accountability, because we only need to look at contemporary examples of Prince Andrew as well, just to show how little that they're actually held accountable to, and everything can just be swept under the carpet. Someone like Prince Andrew should not be in that position anymore if it was any democracy. And I think what underpins democracy for me is change. We should be able to change. We should be able to be in a society where we feel we have an opportunity to change things. And what the royal family represents is something static. It's not something that we can change. The fact that you could literally be a head of state till you die, to be honest, that's not... I think that's something very problematic. So you can be ruling 50, 60, 70 years, and I think that's really wrong in contemporary society. So those are things that I think we really need to see that we do away with.
Yeah, so I'd just like to echo calls for to understand the opportunity of a Scottish Republic as something which can help in the deepening of democracy in society, although I might go a bit further with that, because I would argue that the idea of an independent Scottish Republic is not just a way of reconsidering how we use our democratic mechanisms, it's also a way of instituting completely new democratic mechanisms and getting away from the nation-state paradigm in politics. Because I would argue that an independent Scotland should have a lot more power invested, firstly in local government. There's been a tremendous loss of power in local government since the Thatcher era. Secondly, it should get rid of restrictions on trade unions, which are being introduced by the Central Westminster government. But it's also a much deeper opportunity for instituting a new grassroots model of democracy, which is, both political but also social and economic in the way it looks towards the future. And I think that, it's also a chance to look back on our history, look into the future, because there's, things in our history, like the rising of 1820, where weavers in Scotland stood up and they basically just fought for democracy and fought for democracy in this country. And it's not remembered, it's not taught in schools. Or like down the Cowgate, there was a guy called James Connolly who was born, and he, was very instrumental in Ireland getting its independence. And I think, or John McLean, and I think we need to look towards our futures also as a way of looking towards our past and the legacy of this past.
Thank you all so very much. If I could I get any of you to tease out maybe some examples of what that could look like, because we see people talking about a second chamber made up of people in some kind of jury duty, or some people talk about citizens' assemblies, others talks about presidency models. We're talking about, are we looking to other countries in Europe? Where are there good examples of what a republic looks like that we could maybe choose from?
I mean, I don't think we can reasonably argue that there's any perfect example anywhere. But certainly things that we could pick and choose from. I'd love to sit and have a constitutional debate about a second chamber. I personally don't like the idea. I'm not sure what problem it's trying to solve. And I think we talk about citizens' assemblies, and I hear people talk really passionately about, members of the public being empowered to come and make decisions about laws. And I kind of think, is that not what we do? Because we are members of the public who stood for election and have that accountable role to people. So I accept fully there are issues with representation in politics. There are issues with access to elected office for particular groups. There are issues that many of us come up against as MSPs, and there are issues that our middle-aged male able-bodied colleagues do not come up against. But I would much rather focus on tackling those issues than say, okay, let's just bring in jury service politics, because I know, how much it takes to get your head around every bill that's coming up and all the equalities issues that you have to keep in mind. That, I can't quite imagine, myself in my previous role in the ambulance service being able to give up enough time from that to come in and make a worthwhile contribution through jury. So. I think it's a brilliant argument, but I'm not quite convinced yet. I think you might want to come in.
I think I don't disagree with you, and as I say, this is very much a kind of a blue sky thinking, really, and looking back at ancient Athens, which even Socrates himself didn't think was done very well always. But it was more a point of that they were both. So as I say, would be like a second chamber, so they wouldn't be doing the kind of nitty-gritty of the lawmaking, essentially, and I suppose I envisage an elected first chamber, like yourselves, for example. But you would essentially, when you make a bill, you would have to convince. What happened in ancient Athens is you would have to go, if you made, just before a law was signed, you would have to go to this chamber and convince them to back you. So it was called the bull, and it was like a kind of bull ring, essentially, where, you know, is this good for us? And these people, and they didn't sit for very long, they sat for a year, so that there was no cronyism, essentially, really coming in. So you would still have that electability, you know, and elected members who become experts. Equally, I suppose I don't know that I think, and it's kind of hard with you guys, because each of you I would be quite happy staying there a very long time, but there are some times I think, should we only have one-term politicians? You know, I'm open to it, you know, and I suppose I'm a wee bit... you know, I'm a wee bit picky choosy, like the ones I like get to stay, so that I clearly doesn't work, you know, like, and I think we'd all be a wee bit guilty of the same, you know, so I would be open to that, and I wonder what other panellists and questions remember about, you know, I think that's really where I am. So.
Shall we come to Fatima?
Yeah, no, in direct response to, that was the point I wanted to bring up as well. I am absolutely in favour of term limits, and I've publicly said that as well. So whether I like you or not, that's why I'm not sticking to one term, because I'm like, one term, to be honest, is not enough to do a lot of what you want to do. Even if you're in a 5-year term, it's probably not enough. So I have had this discussion with people in the past that if we're going to impose term limits, maybe we can make it 3 terms maximum, so that's like, you're looking at 15 years at least, because what democracy needs is different voices, and different people. It needs to rotate. Some people get too comfortable, and that is clear. I mean, even the best of us can get comfortable, and that's why that change is needed. And in terms of appointments, and how I see a future Republican Scotland, if the appointments are going to look anything like the House of Lords, I am going to be a no, because I would like to see the House of Lords abolished as well. And what I do feel that our Republic Scotland needs is elections to any level we have. So even if we want to create a citizens' assembly or something, an authority or a body, I do believe that it's important we have democratic elections to appoint these people. Because if we're going to go into the route of voluntary work as well, some people are going to be doing jobs, and they might not be able to give adequate time to doing that, and that because they need the finances as well. People need to live. So I'm elections all the way, to be honest. Oh, sorry, I think I didn't mention I am not here as a councillor, so please don't. Do not say that. I'm from a part of Aberdeen that's very pro-monarchy, so...
So just to pick up a couple of points, I think, I mean, the notion of sortition I find really, really interesting, of people just being, you know, nominated to become part of our decision-making processes. I think in some ways, you know, if we had a blank piece of paper and we said, right, design your country, we certainly wouldn't design what we've got now. Yeah. And I think that we sometimes try to think within the box. You know, how do we fix the problems of the structures and the processes we've got now, rather than thinking, actually, let's come up with something completely different. That doesn't mean to say that there aren't some really good elements in some of the things we've got now, or that we had. And Jo, actually, you mentioned a couple of things that I think are really, really important. When I talk about deliberative and participative democracy in all elements of our lives, it's not just in how we get to decide, you know, the bills that a government passes, or how we design our state transport strategy or anything like that. It's workplace democracy. I think trade unions are fundamental to that sort of democratic future. And for me, it's about turning power on its head. You know, we know that in Scotland we have the least local democracy in Western Europe. We don't have decision-making that is actually meaningful at a local level at all. Community councils, even where they work well, don't have any power. They don't have any resources. You know, so it's these kinds of things you think, well, actually, maybe these aren't the structures we need. How is it that we support the education of everybody? Because I think, you know, democracy does take time when you do it well, and it's also resource intensive. But those conversations, what comes out of those conversations and deliberations is about creating community. And I think we often see democracy as this thing that lives in this box over there, and sometimes people are elected to sit in that box and do the things that they do in that box. Actually, no, everything we do should be imbued with the sense of democratic power. And that, for me, is a real opportunity. It doesn't mean to say that we'll, you know, on day one of our independent Republic in Scotland, we'll be there, because we've got decades, we've got centuries of inequality, centuries of those hierarchies to unpick, centuries of those institutional, that institutional culture that says, you know, not only is your blood better than my blood, or your skin colour is better than my blood, or your accent is better than my accent. We've got centuries of this nonsense to unpick. And I think that means that we have to consider the power relationships in virtually in everything we do, and how do we support everybody, regardless of where they are in society, regardless of what they do. How do we support them to know what power is, to know what their power is, and to know how they can exercise their power in their workplace, in their communities, on their streets, wherever they happen to be.
Joe, I think you're going to get the last word in here, so on you go.
Yeah. Well, I agree we need more democracy, but I think there is a contradiction to some extent between having your initiatives set forward by your representative parliament and introducing kind of a method of sortition to amend that and to veto proposals. I would propose a much more active way of doing politics. Firstly, I would take most of the power which is centralised in the central government. I would devolve it to the most local level practicable. Because there is an idea of centralised sovereignty in terms of the monarchy. I think that's relatively bad. I would move that out more generally. And I would take the model of the Zapatista autonomous municipalities as a functional model of participated democracy that's proven itself to be able to provide public services in practice. So what they do is, firstly, when they have representatives, though on the local level as possible, they call an assembly, the assembly deliberates, then they elect a representative who I would add is recallable, unlike most representatives in the UK or Scottish Parliament. They are given a written mandate, which is written down by people through discussion. And then they have to make decisions on the basis of that mandate. And I would introduce recallability and written mandates and localised democracy, and I think that would be a much more effective programme to democratising society than reforms to the more traditional parliamentary system. I would also move towards building these structures directly, not waiting for top-down political action. I would argue that as we think about democracy too much in terms of a nation-state paradigm, I would move away from that, and I would argue that if these structures emerge in civil society, you know, these electoral structures that we currently have would become more or less irrelevant. And if we can reach consensus through local discussion, that would create a new political settlement independently of the specifics of how that might determinately come about in law.
Thank you all so much for that really interesting discussion. I'm going to move us on now, and I really want to get us thinking about how a republic could change Scotland. And of course, I have that question down, but most of you developed that theme already. But what we really want to piece together here is helping people understand why changing this broad idea of institutional systems that are far removed from your everyday life can have an effect on your everyday life. So what about a republic would change people's lives? Suzanne?
For me, I came at this, as I say, from a kind of shouty feminist head on, but the reason I suppose I shout from and have done from a feminist section is growing up a very, very, very poor working class team for a teenage single mum, and you kind of realised, like most of us, I'm sure, sitting in this room, is no matter how bad it gets, it'll be the women of that community that get it worse. Simple as that. So that's always where I kind of try and base my politics came from trade unionism and feminism. So I always try and put those two together, although they don't they haven't always married very well in my life, but I think we're getting there. And I think I looked at it from the point of view here of the monarchy, and although we're supposedly, and I do use that word quite deliberately, supposedly have a largely ceremonial monarch in the UK, I think that we all know that that's a bit of a nonsense in itself. And I'd started to look a wee bit at how wrong and how infiltrated in the hegemonic pillars of power our monarchy is, that they're intertwined in every single one of the, I suppose, 6 main powers that we should know about. Not going to bang on for ages, but military strength, one of the biggest, ways that a country will have its power, even more important now, is ceremonial or not, King Charles is the head of all armed forces in the UK, and I don't believe any of us believe for 1 minute that if he had left the phone to one of the armed forces that he wouldn't be listened to. It is the very opposite of democracy. So he's involved in that. Economic influence, well, weekly meetings, monthly meetings, however they often do it, in private and confidential with the Prime Minister, that we get no say over. We don't know what happens, we don't know what's said, we don't know how much influence is being spread. The political influence, well, the same. And also the monarch in the UK is still head of the Commonwealth, the ceremonial head of 2.5 million people worldwide. The cultural influence, how much culture, the 18 million people in the UK who put on the national broadcaster had no choice but to watch the coronation because that's what was on. So the cultural influence through the media, which brings us into the sort of soft power that they have, where people start believing themselves to be monarchists, so where they control without controlling. So what we need to do is break these down and start making people believe through our communities, through our trade unions, through our politicians, is that this isn't ceremonial at all. This is absolute power, and make no mistake about it. And we've been sort of led up this garden path of ceremonial and touristy, and it's just bunting on a nice day. My arse, excuse the French. This is absolute power. So that's so we need to spread the word, really. Thanks. Pass on.
I think this is probably the most important question, because I'm really glad for every single person who's turned up today to have this discussion and be part of it. But I look out at you and I look at the empty seats and I'm like, where is everyone else? Because this is something that impacts everyone, whether they realise it or not. A lot of money and a lot of energy and time is being spent on this family. A lot of money that we could be choosing how to use ourselves. A lot of assets which we could be managing ourselves, including much of our land and natural resources. And one of the other most frustrating things is that I can't even tell you exactly what would be different, because the King makes changes to our bills that even MSPs aren't privy to the details of. So we know when changes have been made, but we don't know what those changes are. And that's so wrong. We don't even know the extent to which the powers are currently being used, let alone how much further they could go if the King felt like it on that day. So yeah, I think we do need to get better at explaining, just, say if we had an extra 350 million that we were going to spend on a party for the King, what would we do with it instead? And how would that impact people's lives? Because where are the school kids who could have more money in their families' pockets? Why aren't they here? Where's everyone else in Edinburgh? And why haven't we got this message across to them yet?
Yeah, I would like to also talk about the principle of Crown consent. This idea that if because there's basically a law that if the Crown if there's a bill being passed which affects the monarchy's financial interests, then the monarch has veto over that law. And they've made amendments to protect their properties, which have harmed the working conditions of people employed by the monarchy. So, I mean, it's just corruption. It's legal corruption, in my opinion, this principle of Crown consent, and we need to get rid of it. Secondly, I'd also, in terms of an independent Scottish Republic, talk about the Barnett formula, which is a formula which means that Scotland's budget, to a certain extent, is determined by how close Scottish government policies are to English government policies. I think that would be a wonderful thing to get rid of, because it would give Scotland much more financial independence in its budgets. I'd also talk about like land. Like there's one duke that owns over 200,000 acres of Scottish land, you know, and there's a lot of problems with wealth in this country. Something like the wealth is 10% over 40% of the total housing stock, according to Glasgow Uni. So I would really look at the distribution of land. And I think the idea of an independent republic with an independent financial system for England gives us that opportunity to improve people's terms and conditions, as well as reduce inflation and have a much more democratic approach to trade unions, rather than the very authoritarian one that's been brought in. I would also, sorry, what am I thinking? I would also sort of suggest the idea of like a actual written social contract could be something that could be implemented. Like there was, like I mentioned the Zapatistas, they actually went and wrote a social contract with the consent of their population with mandated representatives. So I would like to see a change in our legal basis and our constitution written with the consent of a majority of people. I would also think like it would be much better to get like local people like more involved, because I do feel like there's a very much drop down thing in politics at the moment, which creates, you know, like why is there no one here? Because it wasn't passed through the local activist networks. Like those 5 or 6 organisations, like events usually go round. I mean, I probably should have put on there, but it didn't get put on. So I think like having these strong networks are the basis for local assemblies, whether they're part of government or not. And I think a lot of really hard ground level base building work is necessary to really implement a meaningful Republican political project. And I don't think top-down politics in the traditional model is really capable of that. Like a good example might be the climate movement, how that's created a lot of political impact without much. I mean, they have the Green Party, but in England, there's not much, you know what I mean? Sorry, I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, in terms of opportunities, like I'm looking at, we have an opportunity for a better representative democracy because we don't have that now. The monarchy does not capture the mood of the nation. I don't believe it ever has. I always make the economic argument because I am truly convinced, I'm well and truly convinced that without the monarchy, we have so much back that we can reinvest into our communities, and I'm talking at all levels. We have so much more that we can take. And Emma's already mentioned land as well, but I think the real examples I use, the ones that really turn people's heads, is the cost of living crisis and what happened during that time when the Queen sadly died. I say sadly because she does seem like a nice person. It's just the institution I don't like what she's come from. But if you look at each local authority, some local authorities gave money to that funeral, some eye-watering, some in the grand scheme of things. And it was quite painful to see that money go when people in these communities were really struggling during the cost of living crisis. Then we had the King giving a speech on the cost of living crisis, wearing like 100,000. So the monarchy does not capture the mood of the nation, and we can absolutely get more back without them. And for people who think, oh yeah, tourism, they bring in so much money, etc., even if that's an argument you want to make, that is fast dwindling, to be honest, because it is a centuries-old institution that's actually declining in terms of what it can actually bring in contemporary society. So the time is, I do believe the time should be now, but in terms of, realistically, I always hear that it's unlikely the monarchy will be abolished, but I do believe if we keep pushing, you can probably get there.
So I suppose just, to come back to your question, John, about how would things be different? What would change for people in Scotland? And I think, we've all folk have already touched on several different things. The economic argument, I think, is very, very powerful. The amount of money that goes into that family and the amount of money that is hoarded by that family and not enabled to be for the benefit of all. And I mean, the idea that, you have to have a monarchy to have the tourism is just nonsense. And I refer you to France. I'm not suggesting that we necessarily do the same thing as the French did.
Oh, I know it.
Because I'm also a pacifist. No. But I think that they're much more not much more fundamental, but the thing is that financial clout comes from somewhere. And I go back to my opening 3 points. And the second of those, around equality, the dripping entitlement that family has, that comes from bloodline, that breeds this notion of privilege, it has seeped into every element of all of our societal structures. And therefore, we have people who don't think they are worth the same as the person who lives next door, which is just fundamentally batshit. You know, it's just wrong. And we don't get away from that with a representative democracy in the current system. It's just not possible to do that. And I think, you know, other people have written much more eloquently on this, but the United Kingdom is not a modern state. You know, it doesn't have a constitution. It doesn't have a clear sense of how people function within the state. You know, if you have a British passport, whatever colour it happens to be, you're subject. You know, and I mean, I smile, Suzanne. You talk about the Commonwealth. The only reason I can be an MSP, an elected member in the Scottish Parliament, is because I'm a Commonwealth citizen. So I appreciate the irony of what I'm saying here, but we would change our immigration rules anyway if we were independent. But I think it's that culture of privilege and entitlement that seeps through absolutely everything. And without the monarchy, we have an opportunity to do something different. We have an family. I think there's real opportunity there. The final thing on this, and I think this is important. It's maybe less true of Charles, but none of us actually knew what Elizabeth thought about anything. You know, what was her opinion on global debt? What was her opinion on renewable energy? We don't know. Nobody knew. Nobody knew what she thought. Where is the accountability in that? You know, we know that Charles likes gardening and he does some good stuff and all that kind of thing. But other than that, what do we know about these people other than their dripping privilege? That's no way to run a modern state. We call ourselves a 21st century state. Are we, my arse?
That might become the catchline of this entire thing. Are we, my arse? Really interesting, insightful stuff coming from all sorts of areas there. One thing that a lot of the members were really keen to hear more about was how the dismantling of the monarchy also leads to discussions of the aristocratic class, the lords and ladies, talking about certain dukes owning 200,000 acres, who owns the building I literally work in. You know, like, can we change that, even if we get rid of the monarchy? To what degree can we move those things around? Is that possible?
Well, I've maybe notes here. Monarchy, beg your pardon, the nobility and the aristocracy would be completely wiped out. All crown estates would revert to the public immediately and instantly, and all their privilege would fly out their arse. I do think that all the, you know, again, what Maggie said about France, you know, they managed just well with Versailles being owned as a tourist destination. There's absolutely no reason why all of these buildings and lovely places can't be preserved for the historical societies through a version of National Trust and libraries, monuments to the public, and become money makers, with each and every penny being accountable to the public purse. You know, I think that in this kind of question you talked about an honour system. I kind of do believe in an honour system, a very, very different honour system, where absolutely everything's transparent, be it a website where somebody can nominate Jeannie up the road, you know, and if she's doing a lot of great works in the community, it would be very totally transparent at every single level, with an independent panel, an independent committee that is voted in democratically, where it would be a very much a term, you know, either we give people an honour for a year or 3 years, but certainly no hereditary peerages. And we could obviously pull them out, take their honour off them at any point. And it would be on achievement and impact and contribution to society, not who you are and who your pals are and how much money you've got and where you were born and what colour your skin is. So, you know, I do think there's merit to giving someone who does loads and loads of work in their community and turning around and saying, right, you're right good, and everybody in the country thinks you are. So I think there is absolutely merit on that, but I think it would look nothing like the one that exists at the moment, and but weak all of them, Sir this and Sir that and Lady this and Duchess that. No, if you want to be part of a modern day Scotland, just be Jeannie or Mary or Betty or Billy or Willie, and that's That's it. Work hard, prove yourself, be a decent person, look after each other, be part of community, build community, instead of building personal wealth and privilege. Thank you.
Fatima. Yes.
Yeah, no, to be honest, it's weird saying Duchess Lord because I haven't used that title on people before. I've probably avoided that sort of network, which is a good thing to me. And the last time I heard that properly was when I was watching a rerun of Bridgerton last week. So it's just, it's a centuries old title. So I think I would have to echo Suzanne. Like, if we were given a blank slate, to be honest, titles that exude privilege related to any aristocracy, I would absolutely do away with them. That would be the ideal world, because what these reinforce is just some people believe that they're better than other people just simply by way of birth. And they haven't earned anything. So I would just have to echo what Suzanne said. To be honest, I don't have much to add there.
Just what I will say is that
For the recording.
I have to use these titles on a semi-regular basis because I've got a part-time job that I've been doing for 30 years as an air hostess for British Airways. So I have to use these titles to people that actually expect me to bow and scrape. And I can actually be sacked for not bowing and scraping if some of the royal family come on, which has been deeply uncomfortable given my personal politics, as you can imagine at times. But these people actually do come on, and I'm talking as recently as like a couple of years ago, and do expect to be called that and do expect you to bow and scrape, and they do not even have an ounce of, it doesn't enter their head that this is wrong, they've been so ingrained with this privilege. So yeah, it's very much alive and well, and not just in the family that are the high head teachings either.
I think thinking about the honours system and examples like that, I think the problem right now is that even if overnight, we got rid of the monarchy, all these impacts would still exist. People still think that, the king has some divine right to rule. They really genuinely do think that. You see it in Facebook comments, you see it in conversations in the pub. People have been taught this for so long, for their whole lives, that it becomes a kind of bias in your mind. Even people who are not necessarily aware that that's how they think, they do still have these kind of internal belief systems that have been set up by this institution that controls their country. And, fair enough, that's very difficult to, remove yourself from. So for me, kind of going with an honours system straight away, I think it would be so hard to remove that from this same mix of, okay, so we've all got our pals, and this is where they'll still have their money, they'll still have their assets, they'll still have their contacts and their Oxbridge WhatsApp groups. I don't know if those exist, but I imagine they do. Yeah, don't. But that's the real problem. And I mean, I look at the Parliament as an example. We all get paid the same salary as MSPs. But the people who are there through contacts and through these institutions and these systems and these networks, they have more backing. They have access to bigger money outside the Parliament. They have access to lobbyist groups. They have access to the people who are making the decisions about where investments go, even in public contracts. So that's so hard to tease out that I think if you had an honours system straight away, that would still be part of it. And to be honest, I'd love to see people be recognised in their communities for work that they've done for their communities, but does it not mean more for those honours to come from the community rather than from some ceremonial head of state? So, maybe way further down the line we can start to have these bits of those old institutions come back, but I think straight away we have to recognise that all the little parts of this web are so dangerous to keep that we have to move on, and as Maggie was saying, start from scratch and say, what do we need, what do we want to be?
I think it's interesting in terms of an honour system, because we were talking about a positive honour system. I think we should consider what an honour system would be like if it was a negative honour system. Like 80% of the population thinks you're a goit. We're gonna make it official in law. It's a thing we could suggest. Alternatively, you could see it as a case while if you invert it, the honour system seems blatantly a bit silly. and a way of kind of silencing dissent or trying to create universal and hegemonic values in society rather than plural values. So that's a way you can think about it. That's kind of interesting. I would also, in terms of like talking about like getting people to stop thinking about, you know, things in terms of how, like, valuing these institutions and having been taught to value these institutions is another, sorry, I keep going on about this, but as a case for doing a more grassroots rather than nation state sentiment kind of politics, because you need that education work. I was talking to some guy about like a job centre. I was giving him coffee. I give people like coffee at job centres sometimes. I was talking to him about soy milk, and he was really angry about it, which, you know, is like a thing which gets into political issues. But I was giving him milk with oat milk coffee in it, so I managed to change his mind on plant milks. I think a lot of these grassroots educational initiatives, like maybe not that, but it's very important from getting the ideas of like a republic or like nationalism or like a culture in someone's head. I would also get rid of like different kinds of like titles, like PhD titles, calling people professors, and criminal records, which, you know, stop you rehabilitating criminals and cause people to reoffend because they can't get jobs. Yeah, that's one thing I would do as well, and I'd get rid of like there's one like legal privilege that was like part of the aristocracy, which is the right of lawyers, which have qualified through an apprenticeship to speak in court, even if they already have a legal education. So something like 80% of people with a legal education cannot actually represent somebody in court. I think that's a remnant of like a feudal system of legal representation. I would get rid of that because I think it's not helpful, but that's just something I'm a bit pedantic about, so yeah.
Just a quick point on the honour system. I think any kind of honour system has built within it fundamental inequality. You know, you are recognising, you are rewarding somebody because they've done better than somebody else, assuming that everybody starts from the same point in many ways. And we don't. We're not all the same. We don't all have the same skills. We don't all have the same abilities. And I don't think it recognises or supports or applauds or appreciates diversity. I don't think an honour system actually allows us to treat people who are different with dignity and respect. And I think, you know, if you look at it purely from an economic point of view, and people say, oh, well, you know, they've worked really hard, they deserve to be there. If hard work were going to lead to direct success, then, you know, it would be probably women in very rural communities in the global south who were the most successful people in the world. And that's not what we see. How many of them are recognised in any honour system anywhere in the world? I don't know this, but I'm willing to bet it's zero. You know, and I think that kind of thing, that system that says you should be rewarded because you've done something better than somebody else, that kind of competitive nature, I think it goes against who we are as human beings, or who we can be as human beings. I think it goes against that sort of sense of wanting to build community, of wanting to build a community with equality at its heart. And I think it certainly goes against any sense of being able to recognise difference as strength and as a good thing. We don't all want to be the same. We don't all want to be part of the same sort of, I'm going to mix metaphors here, but climbing greasy ladders. You know what I'm trying to say. We don't all want to be part of that same thing because we're not all the same. And I think we need a society that recognises and respects that. And an honour system isn't it.
Go on, Suzanne.
It's not that I disagree per se, and I recognise there's problems. I suppose I'm looking maybe a little bit forward to this slightly more perfect world, maybe a Pollyanna type world. You know, I suppose I'm just thinking about this woman that lived near me in Yoker when I was a wee girl, and she was well known because, and I think at the end of her time, you were really, really quite well, and she'd fostered nearly 90 kids, and quite a lot of them there was quite a bad drug problem in my area, and she was well known for having wee babies that she fostered, that she brought off of heroin addiction and something. And I suppose when I think of an honour system, I think about honouring people like her. So, you know, I do absolutely agree that there are absolutely these fronds of, I mean, there is a website where you can look, I forget the name of it, my apologies, but I'll see if I can link it on and tweet it, where you can actually look at what Emma was talking about, these I think even within the Westminster Parliament, of the boards these people are in, the non-executive directorships, the money that they make, and the spider's webs of how they're all connected to each other. I suppose I just wanted to clarify a wee bit. Yeah, I no business with any of that nonsense. I'm literally talking about people who, and I totally nod to what Maggie's saying about. People do the best they can, not the best that can be done, and I don't always mean hard work. So I suppose I'm living in a bit more of a Pollyanna society where it's the people who would be least expect that kind of reward or honour that are more deserving of our honour.
Thank you all so much. Really interesting discussions, debates, and I want to kind of move us on now and give the audience a chance to ask any questions or bring up anything they want to know. We are streaming, so when you ask your question, please make sure you have one of the microphones. I'll maybe take this one, thank you so much, and hand it to Kieran here. Would you mind, anyone wants to speak and ask a question, just raise your hand, ask the audience, ask the panel, and hopefully they can give you some interesting answers. Thank you so much.
Hi, I was just wondering, do all your republics, are they all secular? Because I'm just thinking of the monarchy does also have a function as head of state, and it would be quite interesting to get your thoughts about how you would reconcile that, because obviously in a democracy, people that have Christian values, I mean, I'm an atheist, so it's not for me, but I'm just thinking about people who may see the monarchy not just as a rule of power, but as a faith-based thing.
So I think the first thing, yes, if we look at what happened in the 18th century to Charles I when he got beheaded, some of his supporters were like, no, he is king because he was divinely appointed by God to rule over us common folk. But this argument soon died afterwards, because with the advancements of science and other things like that, people started to see that this sort of argument doesn't really hold up. And if we think today, I can't remember the census, but a large population of Britain are quite actually atheists. And I'm speaking as a person of faith. I do not agree with injecting faith into any power when you're ruling over diverse people. I think religion should stay out of politics. It should stay out of power domains. I don't think there's any place for that at all. And I don't think it's going to be an argument that's hard to make towards those who believe that somehow the king represents also the faith, because we do in large operate as a secular society, is even in our institutions as well. We do by and large operate as a secular society, and that's a narrative we've been pushing, and I think it's a narrative that's becoming more accepted. And what's happening is that the faith-based groups are the ones who are fighting now to be heard, because there's a lot of pushback. So I don't think it's going to be a really difficult argument for us to win. It might take decades, but I don't think it's going to be a very difficult one for us to win, to be honest.
I think that was really well put, and to me I completely see them as two separate institutions. So protect people's right to have faith, completely support people who are good at politics and have faith to be in politics. I mean, one of them's next to me. I would absolutely hate to see folk being prevented from accessing elected office and power because of their faith-based beliefs. I wouldn't go down that road. But then when we're talking about starting from scratch and how do we want things to be, what do we want institutions to be based on, I don't think fundamentally basing your centre of power on one religion and that religion's kind of framework is the right way to go about things. So I would just see them as completely separate. It's our duty to ensure people's freedom to religion, freedom from religion, but not to have the two that close together. I think it's something that damages us more than it helps us, and I say that for Christian beliefs as well. I think it's unhelpful to the church for it to be so connected to the monarchy.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get a lot of disagreement on this panel. I think there should be absolute separation of church and state. I think it's unconscionable. It comes back to what I said earlier around the British state never actually having become a modern state. There is no separation of church and state in our institutions and our powers. Technically speaking, I think there's maybe some examples where they are our institutions function as secular, but within our political structures, I think that there should be absolute separation. I don't believe in an ethno-state. I don't believe in religious states. And I think what we need our politics to do is to really to distribute power, and that shouldn't be determined on anybody's belief system or anything like that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I got myself into I tend to do this, a wee bit of bother online during the recent leadership election for the First Minister of this country. But basically, to sum up my thinking, would be if your religion, and this is to anyone, says you can't do that, nae bother. If your religion says I can't do it, now we've got a problem. And that's what I feel. And that's also with to do. Your religion says you have to do that, within reason. Your religion says I have to do it, now we've got a problem. So complete separation, and I can't imagine where Joe's going to disagree any.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to maybe have... I think there's kind of two elements to it. Firstly is our political parties based on religious interests. I think generally secular. The Tory party is maybe less secular than other institutions in British society. I think we would, independent Scotland would not have a state religion, but I think from the purposes of a lot of the aesthetics of state, like you see when they're bringing the king out, they have all the religion, like the cross made of gold, and they're going about. I would advocate that we have a sort of very pantheistic kind of state aesthetic. There's a wonderful story. It's actually from Ireland, about 1900 when there was strikes, or 1906. And they both sides of the sectarian divide, Protestant and Catholic, decided they would just march together on the Orange Order Day and celebrate both the victims and the people who fought or whatever in some battle of I think it was the Battle of Boyne. I don't know. They're always on about that. But I would say that we should have at every state event, we should have a Rangers fan and a Celtic fan fighting in the background. No, I'm kidding. But I think it's important that we give a lot of expression in collective events to plurality of identities, different forms of humanist or anti-humanist atheism, forms of secularism, forms of religion, and I would encourage a very plural aesthetic, but I think the actual political procedure should be kept totally separate from any kind of religious concern.
You want to make a quick last point there?
I just wanted to clarify something as well. Because in case I came across too strongly, I'm not saying completely do away with the religion at all. I wasn't trying to make that point in terms of how we operate secularly. Okay. No, because what I was trying to say is that when we pass legislation, that sort of stuff, we don't go, what does the church say, etc. I do know some legislation is down to, they usually say matter of conscience, for example, sometimes things like votes on abortion, etc. So what I'm trying to make is that when you have people of different faiths. This is really practical to me as well, because I know what my religion says about abortion rights, for example. When you are legislating for people with different faiths, some with none as well, it's not something I don't think it's right, or I would be comfortable saying, because my religion says no abortions, then I will say to everyone else who does not follow my religion that I'm just going to vote no because my religion says no when you're not even Muslim. So that's the point I'm trying to make as well, that in a secular society, we do need to make these considerations. If you don't want to have one, then don't. But voting for people not to, based on your own faith that they don't follow, that's where I seem to have a problem, to be honest. Yeah.
We have another question.
I just wanted to add, I don't think anyone thought that you were saying that, and it was just that we don't have separation of powers right now.
Yeah. We had another question. If you've got the microphone, you have the question.
Hi.
I think you're off. Could you turn it on just for the live feed?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Not having grown up here, really in the UK, I don't understand how anyone could be a monarchist. So just wondering, and because I can't understand where people are coming from, it's difficult to have a debate with somebody about it. Is it drilled into people in school growing up to revere the monarchy? Do we know what percentage of Scots currently would be considered monarchists? And would having an independent Republic of Scotland on a referendum ever be possible, rather than just an independent Scotland? That's maybe a loaded question, but thanks.
Who wants that one? That one sounds fun.
I would say it's very, very present in schools. Growing up in school, and it goes both ways as well. You would have prayers at the start of the day and before lunch. I remember gathering to watch the royal baby be taken out of the hospital. We would have, Union flag adorned halls for big royal events, and that definitely still happens. We saw it over the coronation, and before that the Queen's Jubilee, where resources were sent into schools to teach kids about how brilliant the monarchy is, and who's in charge of the country, and here's the Queen with a dog, or whatever. But trying to instill that kind of British the monarchy really early on. So it's definitely very present. I don't know the stats for Scots at the moment, but I'm sure.
Our latest numbers looked like a majority were in favour of a republic in Scotland.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And I know it's slightly different to England and more positive in Scotland, but it's not as big a favouring for the monarchy in England as people may have you believe. But when it is that ingrained and from so early on, and everywhere you look, it is very difficult to get people to move away from that. I've got members of my own family who think it's ridiculous that I would ever want to get rid of the royal family, and what about to get away from?
Yeah, for me, well, I went to, I think you see it in Scotland, particularly in the west of Scotland, so I'm from Glasgow, and I went to convent school as a wee girl, and it was the exact opposite, but the opposite way. It was like, well, don't really pay too much heed to him, it's Rome that's the boss of you. Not in so many words, but that, it was the same kind of pillars, and we wonder why we have the problems we have on the West Coast. But so we were hammered with religion and power in that sense. But even, I suppose I think about it, when I talked a wee bit earlier about the pillars of hegemonic power and religious power and the soft power, is that never underestimate what people are just used to, and they've just got so used to it. And I talk from a feminist perspective, and we talk about this a lot in cases of domestic violence and coercive control, is that the norm becomes the norm, and people can't fully evaluate a way out of it, or what it would look like, or what a different society would look like. And we've become so used to that. And I think as well, just very, very quickly, it's also why, touching that we've maybe not got so many people here, and why we've not got, you look back to the Jarrow March or even the poll tax marches when I was 18, is that society just, maybe not so much very recently, but we've just got that wee bit more. Most people have a telly. Like, I'm 54, so older than most of the panellists. And we'd no telly, we'd no phone, I remember being hungry. So there was literally kind of nothing, and there was just that wee bit more impetus. Now people have got, even quite poor people in the UK, and I'm not complaining about that, we've just got that tiny wee bit that just stops people getting out onto the streets and revolting. And that was one of Thatcher's greatest achievements, is that giving people just that wee touch, that they were frightened to lose it. They got to buy their council house, so they couldn't go and strike, they couldn't march, they couldn't revolt, they couldn't picket. And I think there's a wee bit of that. It's just the norm, that self-control, that soft power that they have over us, the monarchy and the church, and keeping us, those twin pillars, keeping us exactly where they want us, which is on our knees.
Yeah, I just agree, yeah. But there's a tremendous power the monarchy has acquired due to habit. Like, people are taught it from a very early age. Like, I remember I was in primary school and they told me the monarchy was essential, otherwise no tourists would come, and various other things. But so it's in the educational system, and like both in the early stages in primary school and in the national fives that are currently taught. There is also like a fairly strong pro-monarchist bent in the way that the monarchy is discussed, or it's a very unjust institution which has to be given equal weight to the alternative, or less weight, which is quite troublesome. But I think a huge amount of the monarchy can be, who like read the Daily Mail and like that, they believe in the monarchy. So I think the tabloid media, also like the BBC recently, has been pretty naff on reporting about the monarchy. So I think a major problem is democracy in the media, and that a lot of our media is privately owned, and that the journalists in the media have very little say over if they get fired for what they write. So they have very little say over what they write, and we have very narrowed down opinions. And so I think we need publicly funded cooperatives to produce media, which would give us the monarchy, and stuff. I also think like institutions like the army, the police, people, in my family have been in those institutions, have been taught to believe in the monarchy by their conditioning within these like total institutions to an extent. So I would say that. Another thing, like a poll tax got mentioned, like one great success of the poll tax is that people who'd never, and people in my family who'd never had any kind of political engagement went to meetings about it, public meetings, and discussed it, and learned so much. So I think we need to learn from the poll tax and this idea of public meetings. Like I think tomorrow there's a meeting for resisting transphobia in Edinburgh here. That got set up at a public meeting. So I think, but there's also a problem of advertising them, but I think the idea of discussion and the debate in public meetings on a very local level is essential for unlearning monarchism or something,
To be honest, I can't really remember a lot of what I was taught in primary school. I'm not going to lie. I do remember, I live out in West Hill in Aberdeenshire, and what I do remember being taught about the monarchy was the bloody history of it. Like the Tudors, that was my favourite. To be honest, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question well. I don't remember being taught a lot of positive things, and not because it was negative, it's just because of history. And that's what I was really interested in. I don't know whether I switched off, but I do remember us going over the top with celebrations whenever there was like a function or something. We'd make arts and craft, we'd make like paper hats or something. And then I also remember a lot of positive talk around Queen Elizabeth I and Princess Diana, which made me like the monarchy for a while. And I realised it was just down to two individuals. So I can't really remember a lot. We didn't really go overboard. It wasn't really ingrained with us that they're great, they're this and that. We didn't get the tourism argument. I just remember the terrible history of brother killing brother and that sort of stuff. That's what I remember.
As the only member of the panel who didn't grow up here, I'm going to answer your question anyway. So I grew up in Zimbabwe and did both my primary and secondary school education at a convent too. So yeah, also got the Pope stuff quite a lot. But I think actually it comes back to the media. So post-independence, post-colonial state, but still heavily influenced by British institutions and British norms, even though there'd been UDI in 1965, 15 years before independence. But I think there's something around the role of the media, as Joe said. And my mum still lives in Zimbabwe, and she calls herself a monarchist. I don't think she actually is, but she really, really likes the horses. And I think there is something about pomp and pageantry and ceremony. And there's a cultural attachment and there's a cultural affinity to that. And I think actually some of that is probably okay. It's the institutions themselves that are deeply problematic. And for me, there's that sense of that indoctrination that comes, so I was in Zimbabwe when Diana died, and in Zimbabwe, it was wall-to-wall Diana, and I get it was a big, significant thing for the English-speaking world, or some of the English-speaking world, but it kind of, but why? And I think we saw that with the coronation, we saw that with Jubilee, we saw that with all of these kinds of things, and it's that element, I think, that is so deeply entrenched in our media, in so much of our institutions, that it's kind of, it's that norm, that it's the taken for granted. That's just how it is. So abolish the monarchy, but keep the horses.
We could try and get some slightly more brief ones. We can get through 3 or 4 questions. Bryce, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I've just been, sorry for being late. I was at the Lighthouse Bookshop Radical Book Fair, and I was in some of the really interesting spaces there, and I was learning more about, for example, about just about how we view this
question, Bryce.
Yeah,
a question,
yeah,
please.
I understand. And basically, I'm just trying to look at the alliances for hope, and how we can be able to really move out from this quite hyper-normative, patriarchal, colonial mindset of individualism versus collectivism. And how do we look at actually not having, like, for example, like, how can we move to actually potentially electing an organisation than actually electing people, electing a body of people within the Scottish Parliament? So instead of electing, for example, an MSPs, we can elect actually a body of people or an organisation where there's a collective of thoughts there and where collectivism is used away from that, and also looking at a divestment campaign where we can divest from, people can divest from their titles which have been given to them by the royal family. How can we look at that from a viewpoint of actually be able to look at the way how we can take tangible steps forward in getting this less individualistic, egotistical look of politics, where there's this egoism and there's this individualism, and a bit more collectivism, where it looks to a bit more visioning of actually how we can be able to move forward with more tangible steps into a way which is actually we take a consensus-based decision-making system forward than actually having a head of state or a head of the top of quite a hierarchical system which we're used to in modern British society.
Listen, there's really no shame about being late, but honestly, I suggest watch the beginning of the live stream, because I think that's unfortunately that's where we went, and you'll hear some amazing stuff. But that's literally where the first couple of questions went. So absolutely not trying to shut down, and I'll pass this along, but that's literally the first two questions. So it's just a shame. Wish you'd been here, Conrad, to see that. But that's kind of, I don't know if anybody's got anything else to add, but that feels to me that's exactly where the first two questions were.
Yeah, in terms of organisations and having collective kind of accountability to each other, I think the party system kind of does that. As for electing a group of people all at once, I would struggle personally as a voter to discern what that group would then go on to do as individuals within a parliament. So I'm maybe misunderstanding what it is you're proposing, but... You
need the microphone.
Elect the Scottish, like the SNP. So basically, the SNP would have seats within there, but there will not be individuals behind those seats. It would actually be the body and the percentage of the vote. Then, so basically, it would be the party that comes up with a decision on that point of law.
I think I understand then. Yeah. But no, I think you need to be able to see who's making decisions at a certain point, that somebody in the party would decide how the parliament votes on something that affects us, and I would want to know who it is that made that decision and have the ability to remove them from that position if I felt they weren't acting in my interests. And being Highlands and Islands, I think it's very important to know not just what someone's party allegiance is, but where their values come from and who it is that they're there to represent. So, no, I feel that would remove lines of accountability.
I was going to say, because I don't know if I understand your question well, I don't know if we do that in a roundabout way already, whether that's through policy that each party's put through their members, and then even within parliament structures, we have different organisations that feed into committees and that feed into, they sit there, they have a seat at the table. And to answer your question about the mentality and the colonial mentality, I think decolonising the curriculum is a way forward there. So I'm just picking apart some of your questions. Decolonising the curriculum is something that I really push for, because then we can actually get rid of all this mentality and this whole bloodline hereditary thing, and get the truth, to be honest. And in terms of what you're saying about the organisational structures, do you have any contemporary examples that maybe we can look at? Maybe is it coming from examples you've seen in other countries?
It's actually from a religious example, actually, from down in, for example, down in the House, the House of Lords, where it's actually the Church of Scotland has bishops inside the unelected body of the unelected body, is basically like looking at that as a collective model where basically there is actually not just it's a collection, a body of individuals who make those decisions, than actually having a single person who is accountable. Removing individualism and going towards a collectivism where actually there is a body of people who are actually, which goes for a consensus-based decision-making modelling, which I've seen working extremely well within like Climate Camp Scotland, where basically there is actually that consensus-based decision-making model, and that then, if that the decision that comes out of that would then be a vote, and that vote would carry a certain percentage of weight, and there would be multiple bodies set up with different ideological stances, and that would come to that point, that would come to there. So it's taking the personality out of politics, it's actually taking the more policy of politics into that sphere, basically.
Joe, are you following this? Can you answer that one? Cool.
So I would personally argue against it, because if you had to reach consensus within the political parties, that does not mean you've reached consensus with the people who have elected those parties in terms of any issue. So what I would say personally is, this is talking about a way a particular political party can make a programme or a mandate, or decide on what action it wants to take, independently of a mandate given by a voter base to a certain extent. I would argue that a discussion for consensus like that would have to involve the voter base, and I don't think it could work within the framework of a party-based electoral system as we have now. So I don't see any problem with just electing people if we do have a system that's based around parliaments rather than local assemblies.
Go on, Maggie.
I think the two things that I'd like to say. I think the point you raise about competition and what drives competition in political decision-making, never mind elections, I think is interesting. I'm not sure consensus decision-making is an answer to that. I think we don't function as collectives in society, and I think we do need to think about how we can be more community-focused and community-oriented. I don't think that necessarily means we need to remove individual accountability, because there needs, as Emma says, there needs to be a way of, if somebody's elected on a mandate and then turns their back on that mandate, there needs to be a way of dealing with that person, not the mandate on which they were elected. It's that person's good or bad behaviour, depending which way what they've done. And I think that's important. But I think the point about competition is something that we don't talk about enough. We think about. I think it's a product of alienation. It's a product of the neoliberal economy in which we function, and competition is seen as having much more value, or winning a competition is seen as having much more value than working collectively. And we see that in our politics as well, and I think I'd be interested in exploring ways of doing those kinds of things differently. But I think if we talk about representative democracy systems, there needs to be that individual accountability.
Final question. We've got one more. We've only got a few minutes, so let's try and...
I'll be quick as I can. Question for Emma and Maggie. In Quebec, they've managed to stop enforcing the oath to the Crown in the Parliament. Can we see that sort of radicalism in the Scottish Parliament as well?
Oh, God, I wish. When you're elected as an MSP, you have an option to give an oath or an affirmation. So I think we both went for the affirmation. And we both protested. And we both protested in different ways. So I also gave my affirmation in Shona, which is the majority language in Zimbabwe. Badly mangled some of the accent. I'm not a Shona speaker, but I thought it was an interesting subversion of power. I think, given that seeping institutional sycophancy that we have to the monarchy, I don't see any kind of resistance anytime soon. That doesn't mean to say that many of us aren't arguing for it and agitating for something like that. I think what I would like to see, one of the reasons, if we don't affirm our allegiance to the monarch or give an oath, we don't get our staff costs paid for and all that. That kind of thing is, if you don't, with your fingers crossed or otherwise, if you don't say something you don't believe in at all, but if you don't say it, you don't get the money to pay your staff. You don't get all of the stuff that you actually need to do your job as an MSP. That's just fundamentally broken. I think that typifies just how broken the system is.
Yeah, so I also protested and then took it twice because I did it in Gaelic as well, and got some criticism for that because folk are like, well, you didn't want to do it once, but you'll do it twice. Well, yes, and I resent having to do it at all, but if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it in my own way. And we did see quite a lot of people protest this intake. Myself, the former First Minister, were the ones from the SNP, all the Greens, and quite a few from Labour as well. So there is a growing frustration with having to, it's the first words that you speak as an elected member. If you don't believe them, well, that's not a great start to your new career as a representative. So I would love to see a change. I think, there's always that appetite right at the beginning once you've had to go through doing the thing that you didn't want to do. But then you're caught up with, well, right now, ensuring human rights and increasing social security provision to people who need it, and it falls off the agenda. I don't know if it would be successful, any effort this term to try and move away from it. I don't know if it would even get anywhere near being challenged in court, although that's absolutely where it would end up if the Scottish Parliament tried to break away, because I think it's unlikely that we have the power to choose that ourselves. And it's even more unlikely that the UK government would be happy with making that change. So I don't see it changing anytime soon. I like to think that once we gain our independence, that appetite will be there and we can make a fresh break. But no, unfortunately at the moment we're stuck with protesting and saying it in other languages.
This panel anyway, I can't not give a nod to the great Rosie Keane, and in some ways we're all Rosie Keane, but how sad, I had the joy of being there on that day when she did that, and but the fact that we can still talk about it, the fact that Rosie's, and it's all these years later, and I think actually what Maggie and Emma said really is, it's circled right round to essentially what is so wrong about the monarchy, that here we have two of our democratically elected parliamentary representatives who have to speak their first words in a modern parliament in our country as lies, something that they don't believe to be true. And surely to God, that's exactly what's wrong with it all.
Thank you so much. Any last words from any of you, please?
Yeah, monarchy is bad. It's a bad institution. I would argue that a lot of grassroots work is needed to bind a lot of different movements together in order to get rid of it, and it can only be done by building a majority at a grassroots level or something. I don't know. I'm giving up the mic.
It starts here.
I can type swear, I just don't say swear. So.
Thank you to all of our panelists for coming and talking to us today. Thank you for those in the room who have listened and asked questions and come down here. And thanks to all the people who joined us online. It's been a really insightful, interesting conversation. I've sat here in rapt interest. I was fascinated by the whole thing. That is us finished. Tristan, you look like you want to say something?
Yeah, just a pitch from the organisation itself. Our Republic is a membership-led organisation. We are funded by our membership, we are run by our membership, and we have a space on our committee right now. So if anyone would love to leap in both feet and get involved in building Scottish republicanism, please do get in touch. and I can take you through the entire process of signing up as a member and engaging with us. Thanks very much for coming along.
There.